I'd like to call to order the Carson City Airport Authority. We are at the Sierra Room of the Carson City Community Center. It is Wednesday, April 17th. It is 6 p.m. I would like to have the secretary call the roll, please.
Chairperson Law,
Here.
Treasurer Harvey, here. Member Barrett, here. Member Golden, here. Member Hamilton, here. Member Harris, here. Member Rogers, here. A quorum's present.
Thank you. Would you rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. With the item C, the approval of the minutes of the past meetings, in the last minutes that were put forth by our secretary, it was noted that the amount of the increase for Cinder Light under the rock contract had originally been misstated by Mr. Moen at 25 cents a ton. It has been adjusted to 15 cents a ton to correct that, to make it agree with what has gone on previously. And with that in mind, are there any other corrections or additions to the minutes? None heard. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the previous meeting.
A motion to approve as amended.
Second.
Treasurer Harvey has made the motion. It was seconded by Member Barrett, I believe. All right. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? None heard. Motion carried. Moving on to item D. Chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. It is my intention that once we start the public hearing portion in item G, that item 4, G4, will be moved to the top of the agenda to allow the presentation to be made, and then our attendee will be Dave Rubin, our fire chief, will be leaving, and so that he doesn't have to spend the entire evening here with us. Are there any objections to that change? Okay, moving forward. Public comment. Seeing none, we will move forward to awards and recognition. At this time, I would like to announce to those who may not know, this is Member Harvey's last meeting. He has accepted a position with the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority and will be leaving Click Bond. Tonight is his last meeting. And I personally want to thank him for all he has done for us. He has worked diligently as our treasurer. And I have an award to, or a citation to give to him.
Not a citation.
No. Very true.
Had him all excited. Pretty excited.
This is just a little token that hopefully he can set on his desk and think of us occasionally. It says, Larry Harvey, thank you for your service, Carson City Airport Authority, October 2016 to April 2019. And I thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone. This has been a... Thank you. I was kidding, asking Ken, where's my plaque? So this is even better.
It's pretty nice, actually.
It is actually really nice. I have too many things on the wall, so I like this. This
I
is
like
great.
it too. Yeah, it's
But
pretty
thank
sweet.
you very much. It's been really my pleasure to serve, and really the changes we made just a few short time I've been here. And now that we have a budget that's actually can do things and spend things, and a great manager, I've just been glad to be part of it. Just to let you know that as a representative of the manufacturing area, I have just spoke with our company, and we do have a candidate, Clyde Simmons, who's been with the company for a number of years, runs our facilities. He is a pilot. Has an airport here. He's very excited about that. He's actually running the master plan of our facilities at Clickbond. So I think the timing of him coming on and understanding of that might be really exciting. So we've asked his name to be moved forward. So you'll see that formally come and he'll apply. And of course, that'll be up to the Board of Supervisors, but still, just so you know that there will be a name forthcoming. But thank you all. It's been fun working with all of you. So
Thank you for your service.
Again, thank you from all of us, and especially from me. It's been a joy working with you. And at this point, I had some surgery done this afternoon, and my anesthetic is wearing off quickly. So I am indeed going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Harvey to finish, and I will see you all next month. And yes, Mr. Rogers. That is okay with me. I don't mind a bit, and I think it's a good suggestion. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have to have Dave sit here through all of our negotiations and so forth, but that is fine. We will move to item 5, G5, for discussion and possible action, schedule May budget meeting and regular June meeting. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Chair Law. I appreciate everybody's consideration for this. As you know, the NRS does require a particular number of days before the meeting and before the advertisement of the legal notice for the budget. So that happens to work out to be, instead of meeting on May 15th, that we can, if we could move the meeting to May 22nd, which is the fourth Wednesday in May. There are 5 Wednesdays in May. And so if we move it 1 week, we'll be in the within the NRS guideline for having the meeting, and will allow us to get the legal notice published in a timely fashion. And then also the June meeting was the second item up for discussion. That would make our normal meeting would have been June 19th. That's the same week as the AAAE convention in Boston. So if you would consider moving it to the June 26th, that will be the fourth Wednesday in June, and it'll make it 5 weeks roughly from the May meeting. So if that works for everybody's schedule, then I can assured be here, or I can cancel the AAAE convention, which is the conflict.
Does anybody have an objection to moving our meetings to May 22nd and June 26th? Mr. Rogers.
I'd like to suggest, based on the convention schedule that Mr. Moen has in June and the fact that we have the open house in June, that we consider skipping the June meeting, have the May meeting as proposed, and skip the June meeting and then meet again in July.
Well, the only problem with that is we'll have to approve the final budget, or not a problem. The only hurdle is to make sure we approve the final budget in May for submission on June 1 anyway. So I don't think there's a pressing June meeting issue.
Mr. Takis, do you have a comment on that?
No, what Ken just said is accurate. It has to be filed with the Department of Taxation that first week of June. And so the budget process will be all done at that point. So you wouldn't need to have a June meeting. I don't know what else is out there that's pressing. If there is something, I guess I just don't know what it is.
I'm certainly not aware of anything that would require us to necessarily have that June meeting. Is there anyone who would object to skipping the June meeting and be nice and getting our budget stuff taken care of in May and then having the following meeting in July? Is there anyone who has objection to that? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to reschedule our May meeting to the 22nd and our June meeting to the 26th. Mr. Takis, your comments.
It just occurred to me, we're in an odd year, which means that we elect officers, and that has to be done by July 1st. But we can do that at the May meeting. I mean, that doesn't necessitate a June meeting, but it's the one thing that popped into my brain that needs to be done before July 1st.
I didn't realize it was July 1st. I knew it was July, but I didn't realize we had to have it done by July 1. I still think that's possible. We can put that on our May agenda and handle that. What do you think? Any objection to that? Okay, I'll go back. I would accept a motion to change change it to May 22nd for our May meeting, and then just cancel our June meeting in lieu of having it in July. Do I have a
I'll
motion?
move.
Mr. Golden has made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Rogers has seconded. Any discussion on the motion? None heard. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. None heard. Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen, and with that, I will see you later. I'll be
Yeah, we'll
back.
talk,
All right.
next week.
And Mr. Harvey will take over the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, in acceptance of the fact that we now are moving to item G5, which got moved up on the agenda. For discussion and
G4.
We just did 5, excuse me. So G4 is now becoming G2. Thank you for leaving me the confusion, Madam Chairman. I appreciate that. For discussion and possible action to review emergency response, compatible street addressing, and hangar numbering convention meeting with airport leaseholders. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. I want to acknowledge that Fire Marshal Dave Rubin is in the audience and will be available for any questions that you may have. As you know, in the January meeting, the Airport Authority Board directed staff to work with the city fire marshal as well as city staff to meet city code and fire code in order to have a addressing and hangar numbering scheme that is compatible with the Carson City Emergency Dispatch system. As a result of that, the Airport Authority scheduled a leaseholder meeting on March 25th. And we got RSVPs from about 8 parties out of 16. And the ones that didn't RSVP, I spoke with directly. The majority of the feedback was, just tell us what you're going to do and we're fine. And so as we sat through the meeting, we had exhibits like this one that you see on the overhead on the wall in the terminal. And we walked through the scheme, both from the city code as that requires the block numbering and the street addressing. And some of these properties don't change at all. But the ones that do change are the ones that don't border either College Parkway or don't have access off of College Parkway, I think is a better way to say it, or off of Arrowhead Drive. And Gonai Road is impacted because there's no access off of Gonai Road to those properties. So if you'll just bear with me, I'll walk through these exhibits. And if anybody has any questions, please stop me. What we also presented at that meeting, I'll go over right after we go over the exhibit, was how the numbering and the addressing scheme will go on the hangars. So as you see here, this exhibit shows in the center of the photo, 2600 East College Parkway, that's the terminal building. And then on both the left and the right are existing facilities that have College Park addresses and are accessible off of College Park. One of them is 2500 East College Parkway, and that is owned and leased or owned facility that is available for lease by Mountain West Aviation. And to the above and to the right of that, 2502 East College Parkway is the EAA facility, and that is also leased by Mountain West Aviation. And then to the right of the terminal building is 2640 East College Parkway, and that is Sterling Air's facility. What you'll see off to the left of the screen or west of the terminal building are 3 hangars. The one to the south, 2482, what we're calling Perimeter Road, that is George Byard's facility. Just to the north of that, or is to the left, 2472 is Cactus Air Force, and to the right, 2478 is Weaver Aviation. Those facilities do not have access off of College Parkway, and we utilize the perimeter road that passes through the front of those as the addressing mechanism. Now, also of note is the red fire lane depiction on there, and that is the Station 52's access to the airport from their firehouse. That has a man gate that's there, and so that would be a relatively easy access point for them to the airport and those facilities there. If there's no questions on this particular one, I'll just move to the next slide. Go ahead.
I don't want to delay the process, but I do have a logistical question.
regarding the fire lane there. Yes, sir. I have personally noticed, maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing when I say fire lane, that one of the tenants over there has used that area for storage equipment. There is equipment parked to the west side of that fire lane, and that is something I'm working with the tenant about relocating. And when we go into the budget, we talk about some of the rates and charges. There's an item on there that I'll share with you that we're discussing with that tenant. And also, just as note, where it says gate, that's currently a manual gate that has a padlock on it. So in our perimeter fence project, there's gonna be a electronic gate with a pad for quick access. So that's also part of the overall picture.
Will that be also part of, will anyone be able to use that?
No, that's strictly gonna be fire department access.
fire
Yep. It only accesses the north side of their facility and onto the airport. So there'll be no street access to that. The next diagram you see here, let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller. This is the, what they call the T-hangars or porta ports. They also border the perimeter road, but they border taxiway alpha. And if the perimeter road does ever change, it wouldn't have a big impact on those facilities. The perimeter road that you saw in front of those other hangars on the previous page, that won't change. But this roadway that we're looking at here that accesses around the west side of the airport may at some point change. So we use the scheme of all the airport addressing, try to utilizing the taxiways to identify these locations. And so you see the addresses based upon the addressing scheme of the city, various, I can't quite read those as small, 2375, 2397, I believe, 2425, 2457 alpha. And then the hangars are numbered in a manner that's consistent from row to row. And so what you would, when we get to the signage aspect, there would be a sign on both the north row and the south end of the row that would identify on which side of those hangars the various addresses are. The next diagram is to the west, or excuse me, to the east of Sterling, and that's the yellow hangars that are closest to the main ramp there. That's Comstock Aviation. And just to the east of that is Silver Flight. Those are the blue hangars. And similar thing, each building gets its own separate address. So if the buildings aren't contiguous and connected, then they get their own address. So you see a couple ones on the far row there that have their own addresses. I'm going to blow that up because I can't read it. There we go. So 2811, Alpha, et cetera, those are we have to walk those hangars to come up with the addressing hangar numbering scheme. We haven't done that as of yet. And then you can see the other ones that are closer to Alpha to the east, 2851. Those are, and 2855 are separate buildings. And if you continue to the east, you see where the NDOT facility is. It's 3140 East College Parkway. That's already their current address. So that doesn't impact any change to their numbering scheme. Here's a little bit of a change on the Arrowhead facilities. There are various parcel numbers out there. Those are the ones you see at the very top. So 005-011, those are the various parcel numbers. But there's only 4 addresses that are out there. 2101 Arrowhead Drive, that is Mountain West Aviation. And then to the west of that at 2001 Arrowhead Drive, that is their other hangar. And then if you go further to the west at 1999 Arrowhead Drive, that's Gonai. It currently has a Gonai Road address. And since there's no access off of Gonai Road, we're going to change that address to an Arrowhead Drive address. And Gonai Aviation was represented at the meeting, and so they were fine with that change. If you go to the south of that 2025 Arrowhead Drive, that's Shade Tree Aviation. They were not represented, but we will communicate that issue to them as well. That is their mailing address currently, is a Gonai Road address, but they're going to have a change to that address as a result of this scheme. If you go further south on that and you look at these parcel numbers, if there was ever an opportunity where those parcels were leased they would end up with a street address. But since it's just ramp space, they won't have one. On the next exhibit, this is off of Arrowhead Drive near Bravo Taxiway. So there's gate 4 at the very top of this diagram. You can see the purple line there that matches Arrowhead. That's gate 4. Those facilities all have Arrowhead Drive addresses currently, so they'll not see a change in their hangars, but they will have signage. Oops. The next exhibit, this is the Carson Air Group, Carson Executive, Jet Ranch, and now the new Heritage Hangars. And one of the things that really drove this discussion was, as you know, Heritage Hangars area, Skyway Aviation, Sierra Skyways is the one building where you see those 8 hangars. I think there's only 6 of them though, but is there 8 there, Mr. Rubin?
There's either 6 or 8.
Yeah, so when we walk that, we'll ensure that we get those correct. But you see to the 2713 Charlie Taxiway, that's currently the Heritage Hangar, and they have a different hangar numbering scheme. They were represented at the meeting. They're fine with any change that we make, as was Sierra Skyway. And then if he builds phase 2 and 3, then they'll get a Taxiway Charlie address that will be appropriately sequenced. It got a little bit tricky if you go to the south of those in the purple. That's the Jet Ranch area and also John Mays' property. John has a 4145 Taxiway Bravo address. Since that's accessible off of Bravo, we use that numbering scheme. Jet Ranch is also going to maintain that, even though their access is really this little, it's not really even a labeled taxi lane. But we're going to use the Bravo numbering scheme because it fits a lot easier in the mix as opposed to coming up with a new name out there. And then those 2 purple spots you see in the center triangle area, those are just lots that are currently under lease to KCXP Investments. And they have a Taxiway Charlie addressing scheme. If you go a little bit further south, that's Carson Air Group. That's in the chartreuse or pink, I guess, area. Those have their own separate, those buildings, even though they're not contiguous, Mr. Rubin, you can weigh in on this. They have a block address, but were we gonna,
I think that's one of the ones that we have to ground truth when we get
Okay.
out there and see how that's gonna lay out.
so they may end up with their own separate taxiway Bravo address, but the hangar numbering scheme will be very similar as we've discussed with the other ones. The green area, this is the Carson Executive area, and we're utilizing Taxiway Delta for the numbering scheme or the addressing scheme off of that. That's Taxiway Delta to the south of those hangars. And very similar thing, when we do a site walk, we'll ensure that those are all delineated. And so the signage goes on both the north and south end of those separate hangar rows. If there's a split in the middle like that, there's no drive lane through there, they're not going to get a separate signage. So should be one on the north and one on the south. And then we'll work with the city and the Carson Fire Marshal's office about where the placement of the signage will be on facilities like the Jet Ranch and John Mays' facility. So with that, I'm willing to entertain any questions or comments. And Mr. Rubin, you may want to come up to the table if they have any questions for you.
Who pays for the signs?
I'm sorry?
Who pays for the signs?
Well, that's one thing that we reiterated to the tenants when we discussed them, that I was gonna project manage it on their behalf, and that I would get a quote, proposal, and that I would submit to them the cost of the signage and the cost for installation. So the various leaseholders are responsible per their lease for those kind of meeting code requirements.
And you got vertical head nods? at
Yes,
your-
oh
at your
yeah,
meeting?
that, they were, we didn't have any negative comments, nobody threw eggs or rotten tomatoes at us. They were all very amenable, they're all basically all sat there and said, makes sense to me, and so let's proceed.
Other questions? Well, thank you. Thank you, Manager Moon. Thanks. Fire Chief, thank you for coming down. So at this time, any other questions or I'll look for a motion.
Can I ask a question? Did you guys give any thought to, instead of numbering each of the hangars in the rows with the identical numbers? You know, like, for example, I'm just looking at Carson Air Group, where the northernmost hangar on each of them is numbered 60. Give any thought to numbering maybe the first row 60, that top hangar, the next one 61, the next one 62, and the next one 63, just so that if you get an emergency call and they tell you they're in hangar 67, you immediately know which row it is, because they may not know that address that you've got, this, you know, the addresses that for each of these blocks of buildings may not be available to them, but they would probably know the number that's on the outside of the hangar that they're in. Just thought.
Sure, Dave Rubin for the record. We did not look at that, and the reason is it kind of puts us back to the situation we're at now, where we could potentially have hangar 67 in multiple places. So the direction that the dispatcher, if they called 911, would say would be go out to the end of the building, there's a big number there, tell me what it is, and that person would be able to give them the actual building number so we can find it quicker.
I think we're saying the same thing, but we're coming to just the opposite conclusion. Right now, if somebody tells you they're in hangar 60, you've got you've got 3 or 4, actually, there's another row there. You've got four potential hangars to be at, and the additional information they would need is to know what that address is at the bottom, which may not be something that someone who's in an emergency situation can clearly give you. But if you change those numbers off by just one digit, that way, when the person says, I'm in hangar 62, you would immediately know it's the northernmost hangar of that block. And you wouldn't be asking them which of these is, and you wouldn't be sending your truck out saying, okay, which of these 4 60s is it? And I'm just throwing it out as an idea, and just asking you to consider it. I'm concerned that the basic reason for doing this was a common belief both by the fire and rescue and by the tenants that if somebody has a medical emergency or some other emergency, that you guys are able to get there quickly. Because, you know, if I'm out there having a heart attack, I want you to get there as quickly as possible. And I'm just looking at other ways to avoid the confusion that you're dealing with right now.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve. We'll take it under advisement and see how that would fit into the addressing scheme that the CAD dispatch requires, and all the other parameters we have to work in. And there may be, like Ken said earlier, there may be some minor tweaks as we go out there and ground truth all this stuff to see what makes sense on the ground. It's one thing to look at it like this, but, you know, we need to go out on the ground and see how, when you're standing there, what makes the most sense. So.
I've got a question. I'm looking down here, and one of the hangars I'm in is actually T22, but I see here it's marked T30. Are we suggesting that we change the numbering on the existing hangars that are already marked on the buildings?
It would help me if I know which hangar you're.
Oh, okay,
so I
okay.
can-
2750 Taxiway Bravo. Okay.
Are those the orange T hangars?
The
or-
T, let's see, that would be on
Oh,
on the same
those are
page. Yeah,
done?
that would be on
So the hangar numbers themselves may end up, on some of the buildings, may end up being renumbered.
I'm sorry, say again?
So if the hangar numbers may end up, the individual hangar numbers, not the building number, obviously, but the individual hangar numbers may end up being renumbered depending on how the sequencing works out and everything else.
Okay.
Yep. So if you
So even
were-
though we got everything printed, like T22, little on the toolboxes and all that kind of stuff, now we may renumber that.
Well, you can keep T22 or lucky number 3 or whatever you want on the toolboxes or inside or whatever, but it would just be on that outside, just like the street address on your house we need to have that to
Okay,
do the right.
okay.
right suite
I'm just
number.
asking because I see
Yeah.
30 and I know that specifically that's T22. And I was just wondering how that's going to work.
Understood.
And I will also say that I do like the idea of making maybe one row instead of, 40, 40, 40, maybe 41, 31, something like that. So each one does have an individual, which is what Steve mentioned. I would second that. That tends to make sense.
From an emergency responder point of view, it's not as friendly to us because if it's more of a standard layout, we know that,
Okay.
40 is going to be at this place on every building kind of a thing. It just makes, so it's two different perspectives.
Okay.
And one of the things we can assist in alleviating that is that we make a sticker that goes on inside of all the man doors that has the address, the street address and the hangar number on it. So in case of emergency, you're at 2750 E30 or hangar 30. So I think that that's a wise adjustment.
That would help.
Minimal cost.
Right. And that way they don't have to go out to the end of the building, look at a sign or anything of that nature.
Thank you. Any other questions? So this one, it doesn't appear we're looking at making action tonight. This is just a presentation of where you're at. What are we looking for?
Actually, there is a recommended motion that we affirm the plan developed by airport and city staff and with consultation with the fire marshal's office to implement the new emergency response compatible street addressing and hangar numbering convention. And then we'll go up, with your direction, we'll go out, we'll start walking the project. We'll get all the quotes that we need to get for the actual signage, the installation. We're gonna have to bring the contractor out, of course, as well to walk that with us. So there's, we want your affirmation that we're gonna proceed forward. And we'll notify the tenants after this meeting what the response of the Airport Authority Board is. And we're only talking to leaseholders. I wanna just stress that. It's up to the leaseholders to communicate to their individual tenants what's happening.
Thank you. So, looking for a motion.
And I have it right here if you'd like me to read it.
I can't just say so moved. Huh?
The recommended motion is to affirm the plan developed by the airport city staff and CCFD fire marshal to implement the new emergency response compatible street addressing and hangar numbering convention.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Did you catch that? Member Harris made the motion. Member Barrett seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion.
Thanks, Dave.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Is there public comment on this item? Seeing none, apologize for that. I'll ask again, the motion. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Motion carries. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate you being here. Okay, back on track with our agenda. For discussion and possible action, review amended 2019-24 Airport Capital Improvement Plan. So, Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Let me get to, I don't think I have an exhibit. Oh, I do have an exhibit here. There we go, on page 2 of the board memo. Let me catch up with you. So at the February 7th meeting, excuse me, let me get that correct. I don't have that right. At a previous board meeting, I think it was last month, the Airport Authority Board approved the draft Airport Capital Improvement Program for 2019-2024. And as part of that plan, the grant that we were seeking for this grant year, 2019 through 2020, was the installation of the perimeter fence and gate project And that project, to remind you, is to replace the cattle fence that's along Taxiway Charlie and along Taxiway Bravo, then add 3-stranded barbed wire to the areas of the 6-foot chain link that does not have it, and then to replace the gates and that are currently in place, as well as add a gate at the airport firehouse, and then look at a couple of other areas for future gates. And this is kind of based upon our master plan, so we'll have a different conversation about that. But as we, Chair Law signed the request for the capital improvement plan, and we worked with Kaufman Associates to get our environmental done. And I want to just emphasize what the process is supposed to look like. And this process is supposed to look like is that by October 1 of every year, the airports are supposed to submit their environmental clearances to the airport district office. And they're supposed to provide you with a decision by the end of December. And as you recall, we were going through the midst of the request for qualifications and process with our consultant. It was on staff was Atkins, but it was for every 5 years we have to go through that process. So during that process, we discovered that we didn't have a cultural survey complete, or couldn't locate one. There had been one done during the North Apron project, but it was only mentioned as a portion of a report and a separate report. They couldn't find a complete copy, and so we didn't get the deadline done. So instead of going forward with a contract with Atkins, we were focused more on the RFQ process itself, get our new consultant on board, and then pick it up. Well, during this process, we had communicated this to the Phoenix Airport District Office. And we had hired or retained a professional service agreement with Kaufman Associates for planning, and we retained one with Armstrong Consultants for engineering in around November of last year. So we began to work on the airport capital improvement program, and we didn't have a meeting in December. So in January, we were basically back, getting started. So on February 7th, we approved a scope of services agreement with Kaufman Associates to work on the category exclusion for our environmental for the fence project. And then they did a subcontract with SWAC Environmental Consultants to conduct the cultural survey. And then Chair Law signed that agreement. And during the process of that assessment, the Phoenix ADO office sent us a letter stating that due to the fact that we didn't have the environmental complete, that they were going to push our grant into the next year. I responded with a letter in writing to them, which is attached to your board memo. And my basic principle was that they had encouraged us along the way to proceed on the course that we were. Get the environmental done, get the cultural survey done. And we even met with them at the Nevada Airports Conference in March, had a face-to-face meeting, reaffirmed our airport capital improvement project, reaffirmed that we were in the process of finishing up the survey and beginning the fence design, et cetera. Well, on April 1st, they sent a letter saying, time out. We're way behind on this. We don't see you getting a bid opening by May 1, which is their requirement. And, kind of took the air out of our balloon at that point. And so with that letter, they followed up with a phone call on April 5th. And we kind of laid the groundwork for, we have two options. One, you can just stop everything right now and wait till the next grant year, or you can proceed along the path, get everything done. Let's get the environmental submitted. And if somebody falls out in our program and there's money available, you're in a position to finish it. So I circled back with Armstrong Consultants and laid out what the proposed steps forward were. And so we agreed that we would do the preliminary design and the boundary survey while they were looking at the environmental. And there's no reason that the environmental is not going to go through and we're going to get a category exclusion. The preliminary report from the cultural survey was that there was nothing of any interest. They did find a flake of some sort of material that dates back to the 1800s off of the perimeter road, and I was kind of stunned by that. So they got a Smithsonian number to identify that location, but it's not going to impact our project. So long story short, we took the task order, we went through our independent fee estimate from the engineer, we got that back, you have to do that on every project that's over $100,000. And so we've completed that. We completed our record of negotiation, which is kind of formalizing the process with our consultant. And you have to have that submitted to the ADO to even go forward. So those ducks are lined up. So essentially what I'm seeking from the board today is to affirm this process that we're under. If the board chooses for us just to wait till the fall to get our stuff submitted, then we can stop the preliminary design effort at this time and put the brakes on it. But I think from my standpoint, it's wise that we proceed with the preliminary design, the boundary survey, and if we get the nod, we can quickly go into the final design and getting in the bidding process. There is some cost to the airport, and this is what the ADO said to me on that phone call, was that if the airport can carry the cost, that it's all going to be grant eligible, and so we're going to get back 93.75% of this money at a future date. Now, so the impact fiscally to the airport would be that this money would not be bearing interest during this time period, and instead we would just incur the expense up front and based upon getting it reimbursed later. So that's the skinny of the discussion, and I'm certain there are some questions, and I'd be happy to entertain those at this time.
Any questions, Mr. Golden?
Just a comment for members of the Airport Authority. If you didn't follow everything Ken said, let me reiterate and highlight one portion, which is if a participant in the grant funding program fails to move forward with one of their projects, i.e. another airport sponsor, we would be in line to accept that funding. Inevitably, that will happen. There's no doubt in my mind. That is an annual occurrence with multiple airports that fail to move forward with their projects, and then the funding is available and the FAA scrambles to see where they can move that funding to another airport.
To a non-airport person, is the gist of what you're telling us, we'll do it now if we can, and if not, we'll still get to do it later.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to do this and get the grant in 2020. We'd be doing all this preliminary design and those pieces already. The environmental would still have to be submitted by October 1. We've submitted it now. It's in their hands. And one of the reasons that the ADO has such an early schedule for airport projects is that they try to get in front of all the highway stuff that happens in the summer. So that's why they start in October, done by the end of the calendar year, so that all these reviews that go outside the ADO, that they're first. So they have a strategic approach to it. And so with that being said, they can't tell us, they can't say, hey, if airport B falls out, we'll give you the grant. They can't say that. What they can say is, hey, line your ducks up, and then that way, if you're ready to move, then you're on our list.
So the only downside of this is we wouldn't get a few bucks of interest on money that we
Correct.
spent.
Yeah, and it's about, the rough order of magnitude is about $52,000, of which we've already committed to the independent fee estimate, which we had to have done, and then the environmental, which has already been done. And so the only thing that we're picking up separately would be the boundary survey and the preliminary design, essentially. The project development, that's phased out really over the whole project, or phased in dollar-wise. So the rough order of magnitude total would be about $52,000.
Below the chart of the expenses that you want us to front, totaling $52,000 as the above expenses are grant eligible and would subsequently be reimbursed. What documentation do you have to support that that's real?
Well, the documentation is that this is a grant project that they've already approved on our airport capital improvement program. So these are all expenses that we'd have to incur to develop it. The engineer gave us these estimates after, to be able to present the grant application to the ADO. So these were all the costs that were identified, and we're only including costs that would be grant eligible in this project, obviously, or almost any project, airport capital improvement project. There might be an occasion where there's some item that's not grant eligible. Let's say we decide to add on to a project and they go, well, hey, we won't pay for that, but you're gonna pay for it. These expenses don't include any of that. So it's either gonna be eligible now if we are in line to get the grant, or they'll be eligible in the next calendar year. My disappointment is that we could miss out on a grant for the 2019 calendar year. That's my concern.
But basically, returning to what I asked you, the only loss we can incur is interest on $52,000 that's not in the bank.
Essentially.
Thank you, Mr. Moen. Any other questions, comments from the, or any public comment on this item? Seeing none, return. So I'm looking for is there a motion to affirm the airport manager's approach to completing phase 1 of the perimeter fence and gate project listed on the airport capital improvement plan program 2019-2024?
So moved.
Moved by Rogers, second by Member Barrett. Any other comments, questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Mr. Golden abstains. Thank you. Okay, moving forward. So, old G2, now G4. Am I following up pretty good? For discussion of possible action, CCA to review performance of airport manager for 2018-19 year. I know this is a point that Chairman Law put on and her and I had discussed. We had discussed moving so that this performance would go along with our fiscal year. Made a lot of sense to us to just put it in, so it's part of the budgeting process as well. I would say the last board meeting, actually, I thought that was almost a performance review. I heard comments from every single person on the board about both the budget, where we are, the changes, and I have to echo every one of those. And so in some, again, these were just discussions with one other member. We've been talking about what's going on in other entities and, what we could do. And I think just having this formal process where we actually have put on record a lot of the accomplishments, his own putting into the record his accomplishments he provided us last meeting. Most of the associations I've looked at are 2 to 5%, and I would like to, recommend to this board that what has been achieved this year was exceptional, and that we should consider the maximum for that. So that was the opportunities for us to have any discussion and any action on this item. Any comments? Mr. Golden?
Ken really did a good job last month. Probably didn't realize we were going to have this month, but he did a good job summating, providing us with a summation of those accomplishments over the past year. I was very impressed. I concur with you, Larry. I see no reason that we shouldn't go to the upper end of that scale.
I agree, but I want to put on record that my preference is to have performance reviews be done based on performance against defined metrics. And that I know that as part of the strategic planning process, we're going to identify some metrics going forward. And so I would really hope that next year we'll, in addition to be able to have a list of accomplishments, which are impressive, that we'll be able to have a performance against metrics discussion.
And Mr. Rogers, just because and I know Mr. Harris will jump in, as an HR person, I would tell you that's exactly what we need to do. I think it was fortuitous of the process for us to start it this way, But I agree that now that Harry's had a year in, we should look at the plans, the budget for next year, creating that. And I'm sure Member Harris could be of huge assistance in that endeavor. But I believe it was your turn for comment, sir.
I just, first of all, want to support the increased amount you're talking about. I think that makes a lot of sense considering, well, how far we've come and how it felt before our manager arrived. And then as far as having formal targets, it makes a lot of sense. What I want to encourage us to do is to really focus. The fewer targets, in my mind, the fewer targets, the better. So that really tells the manager this is what you need to focus on. And I want to say that when it comes to the master plan, I feel the same way. We need, we need to have fewer rather than more. We'll get farther. We'll feel better later if we have fewer numbers. And when I'm talking about how many goals, 3 is a good number. So, but I just want to say I support the work that the manager's done, and I really support what Member Harvey, or I've forgotten your title there, Treasurer Member Harvey is saying in terms of the increase. Thank you.
Acting chair, anything you want to add, I'd be fine with that. Yeah, I think, obviously you found a volunteer to work with the chairman on next year's performance review. Yeah. Any other comments here?
Just want to thank you, Mr. Short Timer.
Well, again, this is about Mr. Moen. Let's go back to that. So, anyway, with that said, any other comments? I'll accept the motion.
I'll move that based on manager's performance of the past year, that we increase management pay by 5% per annum, with the caveat that, and this is not part of the motion, that in our July meeting, we come up with a list of objectives for management to make as an achievement in the upcoming 12-month period.
So let me just clarify. So we have a 5% motion effective July 1?
Effective July 1.
Okay. We have a motion. Any second?
I'll second.
Have a second? Okay. So we have 2 seconds. That's,
You got a second.
Hamilton is a second. Mr. Hamilton. Okay. Mr. Golden. They were going to fight for it, but I thought I'd better call it.
Jump ball.
Any other comments? All in
Mr.
favor?
Harvey, it'd be appropriate I make a comment.
Oh, sure.
I want to thank the support of the board in this endeavor. It was really my intent that I asked Chair Law to put this on the agenda because how do you know if you're doing the right thing if you don't ask and get direction? And I don't think in the history of this organization that's been something that's the airport management has been that kind of guidance. So I really appreciate that. As far as the performance objectives going forward, I think that's what we're really doing with the strategic plan. I think the strategic plan is going to become those objectives. I don't see that coming out of the process with 20, strategic goals, but I see maybe 3 to 5 somewhere in that neighborhood that we're going to say, this is what we really want to accomplish in the next 12 months. But really, it's a 5-year plan where we're going with that. So with that, that gives me confidence in the organization as far as going forward. Whatever you recommend is a pay increase is totally fair in that respect. I do want to ask that if we're going to consider a 5% merit rate, that we also include a CPI that's separate from what the cost of living was over the last year. I checked that number, it's like 1.8%. And then the only other caveat that I asked Chair Law to consider was additional 1 week's vacation, so I have 14 days that I would get 21, and that I would like an increase in the reimbursement for my medical care. Currently, it costs the airport $1,515 a month, $1,515 a month for Mr. Province, and my agreed upon reimbursement at the time of hire was like $558 or something, and so I was asking for a reimbursement of $650. So it's about 40% of what it costs to add me to the insurance plan. So I know that we're going to talk budget next. Just wanted to get that out so that everybody was aware of where I was coming from on that. But with that, that's my comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moen. I really appreciate you bringing that forward. I appreciate that. I know you asked for Chairman Law. I'm sorry, can I just?
I do have a comment.
Great. Can I?
I guess here we're evaluating, and being new here, I don't see a real job description. And was there a job description that we have? And that would be a good start as to being something to evaluate on. And I fully support. I end up working almost every day with Ken at the airport, and it's really been a pleasure, and we've worked things out. So I highly support his work.
Thank you. And Ken, I want to say that I know you asked for it to be brought on forward. I will, just a moment, please. I'm going to make a statement. I'll be happy to recognize more members. One thing that was not brought to our attention, because I actually asked that we bring this on this agenda as well. I think this whole group probably had that thought. What we did not know was these additional requests that did not come forward so that we would have been able to actually have this more discussion. So I don't want you to think that, we don't believe that those things are worth valuing and having interest in discussion. So I want to thank you for bringing them forward to us. Anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers.
I don't think we have any business doing a formal motion on a partial package for Ken. I think that we ought to table this item and bring forth the whole package at the next meeting for review and approval of the airport authority. Well, including all of the extra additional details that Mr. Moen brought up just a few minutes ago.
And as the ignorant one who has no HR experience or industrial experience or airport experience other than airport authority membership, I did not understand what our manager was saying regarding the CPI part of it. Could you elaborate for the ignorant one here?
Yeah, just like we evaluate our various leases and agreements annually for adjustments to cost of living, or we should if we're not doing that. And between my hire date of last March and today, the cost of living index has increased by 1.8%. And so if there's a merit pay increase, I think it should be based upon the current dollar value of that initial agreement, which is 1.8% more, and then a merit increase is on the board. But
Well,
the only comment I was going to make about that is that over time that erodes your earning power, and that's my whole point. So
Again, I think you got two people who understand compensation very well. And generally speaking, that's not how you approach it. And so I would say that although you need to adjust the schedule, the standard on usually every few years to make sure it's appropriate, and you adjust based on that market, usually you don't build in cost of living into that process. You have a range and you go through it. So although I don't, hey, you're all fair to bring it up for discussion, I would say now when I would tell you my first blush, and I'll say this is again my experience, the fact we brought you in with 2 weeks vacation, honestly surprised me, Ken. Usually bring a management professional in at least 3 weeks vacation. So honestly, that surprised me. To me, that is like a no-brainer. That's not a cost to the airport. That is additional time off, and you have to look at that, but we don't pay to replace him. So in my mind, that is not a huge issue for this airport. The other point of your the amount of money we talked about for medical, I also think that's a fair thing to bring up for discussion. So all those things were appropriate in my mind, those items. And I would say to this group, I don't know that I would take off the 5%. We voted, we agree. Well, actually, we're not done with that vote. We have not made the vote. but could the rest of it be tabled until, first of all, I agree, you should all have a copy of his agreement, you should all have a copy of the job description, frankly, and what the first agreement was. We should have been more prepared for that if we were going to get into this more detail. And if I knew, Ken, that you were going to make those requests, I certainly would have advocated for that. So I will let the board decide if they want to table all of those items or allow this, this current motion that's in place to follow through. Mr. Barrett?
Well, I don't have any problem going ahead with what's the motion that's on the table and discussing the other two, but I just wanted to understand whether we were talking about 5% plus the cost of living or just the straight 5%. I think you've clarified that for me, though my ignorance is not, is volumes in this situation. I've negotiated for myself on many occasions, but this is the first time I found myself talking at these levels. So what you're saying is 5% and the 1.6 is included in that, it sounds to me.
Well,
irrelevant.
Or it's, well, I'm still not understanding what you're saying.
Normally, and you're giving a 5% increase on his wage right now with no, we're not discussing cost of living. That is not something we're even discussing.
Yeah, usually at management level positions, cost of living isn't a consideration. It's, you're adjusting ranges and you have a budget for pay increases. And what you're really looking at is, what's normal and how did the person perform? But at management level positions, cost of living just is, I'm not familiar with it being considered.
I stand by my motion, and let me say, I'll defer the HR experience to the two gentlemen off to my right. However, as a business owner who at one time had 5,000 employees, we would never give someone any sort of a cost of living increase in addition to a pay increase, because the pay increase generally was more than the cost of living. And for everyone's edifice here, you have the compounding effect. Because if you're getting paid $100,000 and you increase it 5%, it's $105,000. The following year, if you increase it 5% again, you're basing it not on that initial 100,000, but based on 105. So I stand by my motion that based on the manager's performance, we increase pay effective July 1st by 5%. I think it would be prudent for this group to visit with one another again in May on those ancillary benefits. In particular, since we are missing our chairperson at this time, I think it would be good for her to weigh in on that topic. But let's move on with the 5%, and it gives Ken our vote of confidence, in my opinion. I stand by my motion.
Yeah, I just was working towards understanding, and now I understand. Thank you.
Any other comments, Mr. Rock?
I'll also defer to the HR gurus about whether it's if there's any negative aspect of us chopping up the negotiation with Ken over his new compensation package into one piece now and one piece in a month from now. So I'd just like to hear you guys just affirm that there's no watch outs in that.
At the moment, I would tell you that it hasn't been a negotiation. It was a decision by this board to grant him an increase based on performance. So now that he's expressed some interest on these other items, I think it would be smart for us to take those into consideration. I agree that the chairman law should be engaged in that. She was very engaged in the very beginning of this process. So it makes sense to bring it back, those issues back at the May meeting. Everybody agrees.
And so are you proposing that we don't act on the 5% and just bring the whole package back? Or do the 5%?
I'm saying move forward with this, but bring those other items back at the May meeting is what I was recommending. I don't think it'll change anything. I think this is what we're really talking about. Those are items he's brought up additionally, and let's give due consideration at the next board meeting is what I think I was recommending.
I'm comfortable with that.
First, any public comment?
I don't
Mr.
have a
Takis.
public comment, but I just wanted to reaffirm that I think that's the wise way to go, because your next agenda item is the budget, and therefore you can incorporate into the budget. So I think it's very timely to do that right now with
Great.
regard to the 5%.
Thank you, Mr. Takis. And we saw nothing on public comment, so we'll go ahead and call for the question. So all in favor?
We need a second.
I thought we had a second.
Did we?
Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Hamilton, a
I'm
second.
sorry.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Great. Thank you, Mr. Moen, and look forward to having those next, well, I'm not looking forward to it. I would like to look forward to it, but I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes.
No, I want to thank the board for their confidence in me and in my performance, and thank you for educating me on that other piece. I wasn't familiar with that, so, but no, it has been my great joy and pleasure to hold this position, and I look forward to working with you guys in the next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken, and I'll look forward to watching you grow here. Okay, and so last on the items for discussion and possible action, review of the CCA fiscal year 19 to 20 draft budget. This is something we reviewed last meeting, and Mr. Moen, do you have any updates, comments on that?
I do. We did submit the tentative budget to the Nevada Department of Taxation as was requested and the NRS requires. I have made a couple of minor adjustments in there because one of the discussions that I've had with Member Harvey was also putting Mr. Province on the same track as the fiscal year for his performance. I did give him a performance review in October that made his 1 year, actually, it was probably more than 1 year that he had one, but it was his anniversary date with the organization. So I gave him one as kind of an interim because it hadn't been a full year that he and I had worked together. So in that, I discussed with him a raise, and I mentioned with Member Harvey. Member Harvey did a salary survey based upon what Mr. Province is currently making. And so I included those items into the updated tentative budget from last time we met, and I'll go through that real quick in just a moment. PERS is making a adjustment to their retirement withholding, I guess, for the lack of a better description, or contributions. And that's going up by 2% effective July 1. So that I incorporated I have PERS training actually next week. So I'll get the whole dynamic on how that works out before our May budget meeting. But I know, I'm really not looking forward to it, I have to say. So I just kind of used some round figures based upon the percentages that we currently withhold. And I made minor adjustments to these items that you see at the bottom of the board memo. There's the GL codes on the far left. So I rough order of magnitude on the PERS contributions increased by $1,000. The rough order of magnitude of workman's comp by a little bit of a couple $100. We just completed a payroll audit with Pro Group Management, so we'll get a real firm return on that when that information comes available. But I figured, hey, let's bump it up a couple $100 to make sure we're covered. Capital projects went up a little bit, and I'll share that with you in just a moment on the detail. And then the uniforms also went up, but it wasn't the uniform that added to the additional cost. It was the inclusion of adding an AED to the terminal building. And my conversation about an AED in the terminal building is we hold a lot of public meetings in there. For example, the Young Eagles, the Civil Air Patrol. We had some radio training in there for emergency radio guys. And I even though Department 52 is nearby, an AED, every minute that goes by before when somebody's heart is stopped or not being administered CPR, decreases by 10% their ability to recover. And so I think for $100 a month, it's a pretty nominal insurance policy to add an AED in a public space like that. And that's something that you'll go into more public facilities all the time and see. So that's just me advocating for that. And so the board can obviously make their decision on what they think about that. Nevada payroll went up a little bit. It's to do the deferred comp, which the board approved last month, costs another $10 per month per pay period to handle that process. So it goes from $40 to $50 a pay period. And then I incorporated Gary's recommended raise from 26.04 to 28.44 an hour. So the total difference is about $11,000 from the budget that you saw last month. So before we go any further, I want to draw your attention to the exhibit of the budget numbers, and I'll share with you where those come up. Oops. See if I can expand that a little bit. So you have it in your packet, but if we scroll down to this part there, that's where the changes come in. So you see in red is the new number, and then out to the right of that box are the old numbers. And it should reflect on your I think the only one that doesn't do it is no uniforms is on there. So my pay is not reflected, the 5% is not reflected in this. So for the May budget, that will be changed. Yeah, and the withholdings, I'll go through those and figure all that kind of stuff out too. And then the AIP money will change depending upon whether we get a grant or not. I think we budget for getting the grant and the expense of the grant and et cetera. And I don't think that'll have any impact on it, one way or the other. But the capital budget is not in red there. It is the very bottom line, 6,400. And I'm proposing to raise it to 23.5 from 20,000. And if you go to the budget detail, which is on your next page, I'll go through that real quick. And it's for the capital project for the terminal building. I've been working with an electrician for the south ramp lights, and we applied with NV Energy for a rate credit. And one of the things we had to do is not only price the lights out, of course, that he had in his proposal originally, but also what they're replacing, et cetera. And he came back to me and said, those lights went up $200. So I'm including the additional cost of that. We don't know what the rebate would be from NV Energy. That'll be just a bonus, and plus the lower usage we'll have from the existing lamps. So I raised that from 2,500 to 3,000. And then also last month, the furnace in the terminal building wouldn't fire. I mean, we had the fan blowing, but it was blowing cold air. So I called out the HVAC tech. He was the same guy who installed those about 20 years ago. So he was familiar with it. And he made two comments to me. He said, one, it's your automatic, it's a pilotless furnace. So it was your auto start. That was burned out. He replaced that. It was about $180. He goes, there's 2 units in there to get the BTUs instead of one. Well, they had been wired to only for one of them to work. And so he rewired them so they're both firing. And so exploring that history with Gary a little bit, he indicated that at some point somebody decided it was cheaper to only run one unit and save the other one. Well, this guy says you'll save a lot more money by just getting new units. So he submitted a proposal for about $2,700 to replace the high vac unit. I rounded up to 3,000 just to cover any incidentals. But I think it's a wise investment for us. I think we'll save it in that gas costs going forward, especially once the windows and all that stuff get done. So that's the change to the capital budget request. It's not talking about any of the airport equipment. It's just mainly the things that we discussed about the terminal building. I would like to just bring the attention to the board. As you know, we've improved that space over the last year. And we do have the UNR Shared History Program. I may have mentioned this before, doing a project in there. I'm going to talk about that in my manager's report. But we have this old, and this furniture is just dilapidated. The conference tables look terrible. The chairs are 1960s vintage. And we pulled out all the ones that were mismatched colors, and we only have one color in there now. And we have these old chairs that somebody gave us that are used for meetings. And they're different colors and in various conditions. I'm going to bring forward a request to purchase some new folding chairs and a couple of tables. Just no sense in purdying up the room if your furniture's going to look pretty terrible. So I'll bring back that number in May, and you can either add it to the budget or not. I just think that it's something that would behoove us going forward. So with that, Mr. Harvey, that's my presentation.
Any comments on the budgets for Mr. Golden?
Got some questions here. Is the new schedule of rates and charges part of that budget presentation?
Thank you, it should have been.
Okay.
You're absolutely
I
correct.
have some questions for you, and
Yes.
I have a real problem approving this budget with the rates and charges here kind of buried in the budget process, because this affects the tenants on the airport, and we didn't notice them, that there are proposed rate changes and increases in charges. And so, in good conscience, supporting the tenants of the airport, I cannot vote for this budget if this is part of it. But I do have some questions for you.
Real quick, Mr. Member Gold, let me comment on that. It wasn't I did include this rate and charges document in the budget. It's not included in any of these numbers in here. Okay, so my intent was to, as I pointed out in my board memo, and I appreciate you doing that, FAA grant assurance number 24 specifies airports that have a fee structure. We don't have one. Now, there's some fees that are listed in various places. The gate card fee is listed in a gate card policy. The fuel flowage fee is listed in a lease agreement that Mr. Takas pointed out to me. The legal and the engineering bill back is listed in Title 19.
Yeah, I have.
So what I'm getting at is that to meet our FAA grant assurance, as well as becoming self-sustaining, we needed to develop a rates and charges schedule. And so all my point with this was to bring this to the attention of the board, but not necessarily include as part of the budget.
I have no
Okay.
problem with consolidating our rates and charges on a schedule, and I think for the purpose of openness, we need to do that.
Right.
I have a real problem adopting these rates and charges as proposed, as submitted, because we haven't really given notice to the airport, to the users, to the tenants, that this is something that's going to be part of the budget process. And again, just,
You're correct, and it wasn't part of my recommended motion, so I just wanted,
okay.
I wanted to put this out there as part of the future discussion about developing a schedule. And it doesn't have to be these numbers don't need to be included in our budget. We don't have to do this in May, but it's something that, to ensure that we're meeting our FAA grant assurances by having a consolidated budget schedule. So
Can you
with
answer a
that.
couple questions
Yes,
for
sir.
me about that particular document, the rates and charges?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna make a comment, Mr. Takas. So first, this has nothing to do with our current budget you just proposed. Correct? These are not in.
No, they're not
at
in the
all.
budget anywhere.
So this actually should not have been part of a budget package, because we cannot make this, we didn't notice it properly, and we're not asking for this to be approved. So I'm really concerned about that, and the fact that we begin discussing something that's not on the agenda. So Mr. Takas.
Yeah, and I share the same concern under the open meeting law. It's really, as Member Golden says, it should be brought back on its own, separately noticed. Everybody should get clued in as to what's here, and then you can go forward. The other thing too is, to the extent we're changing things that are in leases or in Title 19, that's a whole different set of issues. And so we need to be careful. Although I would say that some of the items in here are items that in the past, the former airport manager would just take a shot at a value using his judgment as to what he thought the cost should be based on airport expenses. And I think that it is helpful to come up with a sheet of fees and charges. That part is a good idea, should be done separately, separately noticed.
And I think you're not going to find disagreement from this group. I just think it was sort of premature to bring this forward. I think it's just going to raise more questions than it does. And so I would say that this is to be taken away, not to be thought of as part of our packet, and you're going to bring something back. Because honestly, I think, listing our current rates would be a start. And then if you're going to propose new ones, that's a whole nother discussion.
Okay, and you're right, I see that more in my board memo now, and that is an error on my part, I should not have done that, you're correct. Because the motion reflects the budget, not talking about a separate schedule of rates and charges, and I concur with you, thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, with that said, any other questions on the budget? Okay, we'll look for a motion. Mr. Harris.
I move to approve the final tentative budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 with proposed changes and authorize staff to complete final budget for the public hearing of the tentative budget scheduling for May 22, 2019.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You have a motion, and before we go any further, I'm going to ask, do we have any public comment? Seeing none, let's return to the board. There's no second yet.
And I have a question. Did I hear you say you were moving to approve the final tentative budget? That seems to me, just in terms of conflict of
Should be
terminology, I don't think it means,
Or
I
preliminary.
don't know if it's
It's
written.
tentative, it can be final tentative or tentative final.
Because it's going to change next month with the changes we
It's
discussed.
technically, it's a revised tentative budget. It becomes
There
a
you go.
final budget on May 27th.
And to his credit, he's
Yeah.
reading off just the letters.
Right, and I understand that. I just.
More wordy on my
I'm just
part.
going by the terminology. It just kind of clashed in my head.
Let me restate, based on my recent education. I move to approve the revised tentative budget for fiscal year 2019 and 2020 with proposed changes and authorize staff to complete the final budget for the public hearing of the tentative budget scheduled for May 22, 2019.
Second.
Motion and Barrett, Ms. Barrett, second. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to the airport engineer's report. I believe that's just a submitted report, written report. The airport manager reports. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Member Harvey. No, mine's in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. You can see that our fuel flowage was up for the month of March over February. Obviously, there was a lot of weather conditions in February, and the upgrade of the self-serve fuel island was also done that month. So it's good to see those numbers up. And the pent-up demand is obvious on the airport right now. And when you get a clear day, there's been just a lot of activity on the airfield. I have a pre-construction meeting on April 23rd with the Atkins and Q&D Construction to discuss the completing of the taxiway rehab project. Tentatively, if you recall, we asked to get put on the schedule first thing for the construction season. And so we're tentatively looking at May 5th and 6th, which is, I believe, a Monday and a Tuesday. There will be some tenant impacts. Their first phase project involves a couple of things. One is a saw cut and replacement of about 300 linear feet of asphalt that's failed just off of Taxiway Bravo along the hangar ramps, near the hangar ramps and self-serve island. And so that's going to be the first part of that phase, but they're also going to do the fog seal and the restriping and all in one day. So that's going to impact the connections along Delta. It's going to impact the access to the perimeter road off Gate 4. So essentially, it's going to shut that part of the airport down for a day. So when we communicate after the meeting with the pre-con, we're going to have I sent out a tenant bowl today, kind of give a heads up to the tenant base. But there may be some requirements to make arrangements, either be at Mountain West Aviation for be able to depart, or at the South Ramp, or even if they have to go to a different airfield just for the day. And then the second day, the second phase is going to impact the south side. So it'll consequently impact people that operate out of there, including the NDOT. So those would tentatively look for relocation also over either to Mountain West or at another locale, or not fly that day. That's the concern, because until that fog seal is set and dry, it'll make a mess. And the striping doesn't take long to dry, but it's the fog seal, it's the real issue. So there will be a little bit of tenant impact, but based upon that, we're gonna end up with a really nice product at the end. and maintaining our pavements. Along with Mr. Takis, I attended the Nevada Airports Association Conference. And much to my surprise, when I walked into the room on that morning, I was elected the president-elect for the 2021 term. So,
You pulled the short straw, huh?
yeah, well, you should be at the meeting on time, I guess, is what the real answer to that question was. But I was actually, I'm excited to work with that organization. They're doing some dynamic stuff. And one of the things that they're really working on is this aviation trust fund funding with the legislature. And also, as a group, they want to become more vibrant in the aviation community with the Nevada Business Aviation Association, impacting with the legislators, both our congressional delegation in the U.S. House and Senate, but also not just every biennium in the state legislature. So one of the things they talked about is putting forward a strategic plan. And so that's something that we as a group are looking forward to doing. I also presented our economic impact study and the basis for doing a strategic plan, which was well received. And then Lean Engineering made a presentation about our nighttime visibility study, and we had the Phoenix ADO present, and we also had, he brought with him one of the Flight Standards District office folks that's going to be looking at this approach. And preliminarily, they've given us some really good feedback. Both the ADO and Mr. Harris from FFISDO were very excited about what they're proposing and how they're looking at resolving this. So that was a great opportunity for us to get him on the agenda. As Member Rogers pointed out, the open house is June 29th. So this is something that we're going to hit the ground running hard on right now. So we're really looking to beef up the static display again this year. There's a couple things we're cutting out. We're not going to try to do these presentations that we tried to schedule in the EAA. That didn't really go so smooth. And we're not going to try to do any scheduled flying. The airport's still going to be open, so there are going to be activities based upon our outreach to the regional airports for attendance. So, but we're also going to include some vehicles in the display. We're looking for some old-time classic cars, but also we're working with this group called the Rockabilly. They have some unique cars. We're going to have them on the land side of the airport. So to kind of draw different attention, and maybe we can get some people that aren't necessarily there for the air show, the open house, that come and see the airport. So the idea is to, as we discussed in our strategic plan about reaching out to the community, so maybe we can draw some different folks. We're thinking about doing some different things with the food and whatnot, but I'm not going to commit to anything because if it falls through, then, we'll just continue with our normal open house. But if it works out, great. We're going to have some expanded presence in the kids zone, the STEM stuff. We hosted 100 middle school kids last week, or 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. And we got yesterday flyers to open up their museum as well as Cactus Air Force. It was very well received, both by the tenants. Cactus Air Force had yesterday's flyers as well. We're excited to have the kids. They create a video. I think I may have forwarded the link to everybody, the video of the kids at the airport. And so she's invited us to come to their school for their STEM day. And we're also going to bring Young Eagles to that event as well. And so it's a really good opportunity. And these are the kind of opportunities we want to reach out to the community and the youth. Master Plan Advisory Committee is going to be May 29th. They're going to meet at 2 p.m. And then they have the public meeting that evening in the terminal building at 5:30. So that is on the agenda. And then we were going to bring, I should have thought of this when we were talking about the board meeting. They wanted to present the master plan on the June board meeting. So I may have to circle back with them on that and see if that works for them on July instead. So, or maybe we bring it to the May meeting. So I'll circle back with you guys, and I'm sorry about that. I missed that. I did have an opportunity to meet with Congressman Mark Amadei a couple days ago, and trying to get him out for an airport visit here in the next week. So we're looking at schedules on that. I'm hoping to get some draft mission and vision statements out for you, the board to start looking at here. And we should have some presentation on the strategic planning process in the May meeting as well. One big day, if you're interested, to mark on your calendar, April 22nd, that's Monday, is a Aerospace Aviation Airports Day at the Nevada Legislature. It's going to be in room 3100 of the Legislative Building. There's a breakfast. There's two sessions. There's a breakfast 8 to 10:30, and then there's an industry luncheon at 11:30 to 1:30. So we're hoping that the congressman comes to that event as well, since he's in town for that period. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Moen. On to the legal counsel's report. Mr. Takis.
Yeah, just really quickly, first of all, I just want to say that Ken did an awesome job at the Nevada Airports Conference. He jumped right in as president-elect. The then serving president was trying to participate by phone because she couldn't be there. And Ken pretty much stole the show and just got everything running smoothly. So he did a great job there. I thought it reflected very well both on him and on the Carson City Airport. In terms of legal counsel report, two items. AB 406, its current status is as of this morning. Well, this morning it was voted on for second reading. The process to go through the legislature is the bill has to be voted on 3 times in each house. It's a first reading, second reading, and general file vote. When it gets voted on the 3rd time, then it gets voted out of that house and goes to the other house. So it's got one more vote to go. There was a little bit of a Chinese fire drill on April 4th because we discovered just a couple of days before that although we thought we had drafted a very good bill and I'd worked through all the changes with the Legislative Counsel Bureau, it seems like the result that we came out with had removed the leasing, approval of the leases from the Board of Supervisors, which was, one of the partial goals there, but it didn't give the authority the ability to lease, and that language got left out. And so we drafted an amendment, got the amendment submitted to the committee, and then on April 4th, I presented it to the Assembly Government Affairs Committee, explained to them the entire bill, explained to them the oversight, and asked for them to vote to approve the bill with the amendment. They did so on April 12th in a work session, and then since then it's gone to the Assembly floor on first reading. On second reading this morning, it was approved with the amendment. And so my expectation is tomorrow or the next day, it'll go for general file approval, probably tomorrow, general file approval, and then it'll go over to the Senate. When it gets to the Senate, it'll get assigned to a Senate committee, and then either Ken or I or both of us will go testify in front of that committee, explain to that side of the House what the bill is about and what we're doing. When I did testify on the 4th, Mary Walker, the lobbyist for the city, also testified in support of the bill, reflecting the city's action because the Board of Supervisors had approved it. In fact, it approved the latest version that morning. And then we also had one of the assemblymen who very clearly from his questions was a pilot. And so that brought another little spice to it because he said, yeah, but you're an uncontrolled airport. And I said, that's correct, we're an uncontrolled airport. And I see this look of panic. And I said, wait, members, to pilots, that just means there's no control tower. It doesn't mean we're out of control. And that brought a good laugh to the crowd. But then both myself and the assemblyman explained to him what that meant. And he went on to say he has found that some small airports like Carson City, it's actually a much safer condition than the control tower airports.
Was this the assemblyman from Elko?
No, he's from Las Vegas, and I can't remember his name. A pretty sharp, young.
The one from Elko is a pilot and aircraft owner.
Okay, yeah, he was quiet then. The one from Elko.
Maybe they'd like the non-towered airport.
Yeah, non-towered would have been better terminology, but it's not the way you asked me the question. So, okay, in any event, the other item I wanted to just bring to your attention is Under the act that created the airport authority, the terms of officers expire on July 1st. So typically, we try to do those elections in the June meeting. There's no reason why we can't do them in the May meeting. There are 4 officers that can actually, are typically served by 3 individuals. There's a chairman, a vice chair, and a secretary treasurer. The secretary and treasurer could be different people, but we've always just rolled them together. And so please keep that in mind for the May meeting, and we'll make sure it's on the agenda so that it's properly noticed. That's all I got for the legal counsel's report.
Thank you, Mr. Takis. Any questions for Mr. Takis? Mr. Rogers?
Do you think we'll have completion or not on the bill by the May meeting so that we could talk about, because it changes the way board members' terms work, right? Isn't that part of the change?
It will allow board members to be reappointed for an additional 4 years. Yes. By the May meeting, maybe. It's hard to say. We're up against a deadline to get out of the first house, but I don't think we're going to have any problem meeting that. Then it'll just be a question of how quickly it moves on the Senate side. I'm sure you read in the newspaper or heard through media that a lot of bills got killed on the Assembly side, and there were a lot of upset Assemblymen who had their own bills that ended up getting killed, including, and it wasn't just the controlling party killing the minority party's bills. It was the controlling party kind of killing a whole lot of bills on both sides of the House. And so there is always the risk that we get caught in some of that crossfire. But I have to say the reception that we got on the Assembly side from both Republicans and Democrats was pretty positive. After all, we're a small airport, but an important airport in the state, and the changes that we're making are not being opposed by anybody. And that's kind of a rare thing for any bill to be at the legislature without at least some opposition. And so we got a pretty favorable response. I am hopeful that by the May 22nd meeting, we will have that bill passed and hopefully maybe even signed by the governor.
Let's just please report out on where we stand, because it'll impact what we do in terms of identifying our officers going forward.
I will do so.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay.
I just want to remind you that it doesn't mean you guys are obligated to serve another 4 years. I know that at least one member up there at the table has told us he doesn't want to serve 4 more years, and so that would be, and so to serve the additional 4 years, you would have to resubmit to the Board of Supervisors, and then they could, of course, reappoint you. And so there's that other factor that's going to come into play as to how you're going to place people for officers. The other thing I should mention too is there's no prohibition on an officer being reelected to the same term. It doesn't say like once you've served as chairman, you can't be chairman again, or once you've served as any other officer. So we have in the past had people who've done, they've just been very comfortable in the role and they've done a great job. We've just kind of left them in the role for 4 years. And so that's always a possibility too.
So even though Larry's going to Reno, we could reelect him?
Good luck. Well, and of course, this group could also decide they have to have a June meeting, right? That's the other option, right? That's something you'll have to think about. Next up is Treasurer's Report, so I'll put that hat on. You have the report in front of you. The good news is through the comparison in previous years, we're even in a converted budget, we're ahead by about 12,000. Even that, and that's with a couple of extra expenses. You might see the consulting nighttime ops feasibility. And Ken, is that ever going to be eligible for refund on that on grants at some point?
I don't believe we should count on that. The real approach now, the airport made the investment in that study, but what's really going to go forward is we're going to look for the FAA to buy off on this project and not be part of our capital improvement
I think that's
budget.
fine. I would just ask.
Yeah, I don't think it will be. Yeah, the difference in that was the gate project that was on Arrowhead Drive for the quarry. That was a $16,000 non-budgeted item, and that will be part of our augmentation budget item.
So even with those extraordinary expenses, we're under budget for this year on our budget. So we're doing well at this point. So glad I'm leaving you in a good spot, so. Any questions on the treasury report? Seeing none, move on. Any report from authority members? Anybody have anything to add? Okay, public comment. We have anybody for public comment? One at a time? Okay, any agenda items for the next meeting?
I want to just briefly go over what I took down during the meeting for agenda items. At the May 22nd meeting, we're going to approve the final tentative budget. I think it's tentative until it gets approved by taxation, is that correct? Or something like that, final budget. We're going to elect officers. We're going to, benefits was going to be part of that discussion for the budget,
Another review, I
right?
think, the way you put it, yeah.
Right, and then we'll table the rates and charges to a later discussion. We won't try to lump it all in with trying to approve the budget. And I think that's something we look to after the fiscal year and figure out how we're gonna go forward. There's obviously some things that need to be reviewed on that before we have any type of presentation on that. And I have one other item, and I don't recall what it was.
Is it possible it was the update of the strategic plan?
Yeah, thank you very much, the strategic plan update. And so, Mr. Takis, do you have anything else that we missed? Okay.
Thank you. Well, after that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.